This week, Israel's Prime Minister sounded optimistic about beginning the second phase of the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. But Hamas has accused Israel of violating the ceasefire over 700 times since it began in October. Hamas says it cannot progress while the violations continue. We will talk about that later in the show, but we begin with the ongoing humanitarian crisis that Palestinians are suffering. I talked earlier with Chris McIntosh, who joined me from Gaza. He is the Humanitarian Response Advisor for Oxfam. Chris, thanks so much for being with us. You are now in Gaza amid the absolute devastation caused by the Israelis, particularly in the last 2 years. It is now winter in Gaza. We've already seen the suffering of the Palestinians and the hardship that's been caused by the rains. And of course, the Israelis have demolished most homes in Gaza, forcing people into tents and other temporary accommodation. Add to that the fact that there is no water, there's a shortage of water, there's no sanitation, there's a shortage of other humanitarian supplies as well. What are you seeing on the ground there?
Indeed, as you mentioned, and actually I can tell you, looking out the window of this office where I am right now, I can see exactly these makeshift shelters and tents that an approximate 1 to 1.5 million Gazans are living in currently. It's really difficult to get numbers on that because people move quite a bit, but that is over 50% of the population living in these makeshift shelters. And they are tents, I should say flimsy tents that aren't ready for the high winds and the rains that are coming. In fact, we're expecting it in the next 48 hours, quite a storm to come and then sit on top of Gaza for about another 48 hours. So what's deeply concerning is that not only are the people living in tents, but they're living in bombed out structures like the one across from this office right here in Gaza City. And you can see the families that are just living on these floors, exposed to the elements. They put up tarpaulin as best they can to sort of seal off these areas from the elements, but it's not a dignified way to live, and these people are doing it simply because they don't have any other options. And having a little bit of shelter from the elements is far preferable than taking your chances in a tent, often in a low-lying area, because that's where camps tend to be formed. And be susceptible to flooding. But these structures are not stable at all because of the devastation, particularly in this city. As I've shared with various people over the months, it's difficult to stand in Gaza City at any single spot and not see absolute devastation, absolute destruction. It's 360 degrees. And it is difficult to describe, especially to people that don't have much of a reference point for conflict areas, but the level of destruction per square kilometer is absolutely staggering. Again, 1 to 1.5 million of a population of 2.5 million here in the Gaza Strip are living in these makeshift locations because they have to. There is no choice. That's how many homes, domiciles, neighborhoods have been decimated in the past 2 years. And indeed, there was a high peak of suffering during the summer. But I have to say, tragically, that suffering continues because until homes are rebuilt, until infrastructure is properly reconstructed, that suffering will continue on a massive scale here in Gaza.
Now, as I said, it's winter, temperatures are dropping, there are icy conditions there. How great is the threat of disease among Palestinians?
Yeah, so indeed, this is one of our main programmatic areas has to do with water, sanitation, and hygiene. And so this is something that we keep a close look at. And for certain, these tents and other makeshift dwellings don't present the best opportunities to live in dignity, and don't present the best opportunities to live with a high degree of hygiene when you have to combat the elements, when you're constantly in the mud and the filth. And still a lot of people are cooking by burning trash, and so that's another factor in the atmosphere. And with the lowering temperatures and people exposed to this, getting wet in the winter, as will happen, and then being unable to get dry because the temperatures and the sun just don't allow it in the short days of the season. So without question, we're looking at an intensification of the humanitarian problem that persists here. We still do consider it to be a crisis without any question. I think there's a tendency right now, given where we are in this and given the absolute horrors that we saw with the genocide and the famine that was created in the summertime, that things are quote unquote better. And I would just like to make it clear that yes, but this is in an extremely relative scale. And by no means are the conditions here anything better than deplorable for that 1 to 1.5 million plus Gazans who are living under such conditions.
What sort of work can organizations like Oxfam do in Gaza? We've seen the severe restrictions that the Israelis have placed on aid organizations in the enclave. I mean, at this time, are the Israelis blocking you from doing your work? Are there any restrictions? What about you bringing supplies in?
So unfortunately, the Israelis have allowed commercial trucking to enter the strip, but not nearly at the same pace and with parity alongside humanitarian shipments to come into the Gaza Strip. So we are still very much hamstrung by those restrictions. There are even cases where some items will be allowed to come in by commercial shipping, but we aren't allowed to bring it in for our own needs. And to answer your question, which is a very good one, what can we do? Well, provide basic needs such as drinking water, such as doing solid waste collection, such as providing food vouchers that Gazans can go to stores and get necessities. Anything to raise the level of human dignity that they have been deprived of and continue to be deprived of here.
Are there any healthcare facilities still operating in Gaza, still functioning? And I'm thinking of people, especially children, who are suffering severe injuries. You know, in many instances, this could be things like severe trauma, broken limbs, etc.
So the simple yes or no answer to that is yes, there are healthcare facilities. There are excellent organizations and the Gazan people themselves, healthcare professionals who continue to operate with whatever's left of a sort of facility to continue working, be it a clinic or a hospital. But it's extremely limited, and it's, again, these are not well-appointed facilities. They don't have the capacity to practice the same normal patterns and protocols that they would otherwise, because they're still dealing with an onslaught of problems. And it's not just the injuries of people, and thank goodness we have fewer injuries now than in the summertime and in past months. Yet for every injury, that is in many cases a lifelong ailment that these people have to live with. And that requires consistent medical care over the course of months and years. And so there are no hospitals or clinics that aren't completely inundated with people who are trying to seek care for spinal cord injuries and cerebral trauma and other concussion type injuries, as well as amputees. These are very, very common. To walk the streets, just to give you an example, to walk the streets here in Gaza City or in Deir al-Balah, where we also have an office and I sometimes spend time, it's extremely common to see people in the streets with obvious injuries of one type or another, be it amputees, or very common as you see some of the medical rods sticking out to stabilize a broken limb. It's palpable. It's in the atmosphere without question, especially children, and that's the most heartbreaking.
Yeah, you mentioned children there, you know, and as I pointed out, the attacks by the Israelis have intensified over the last 2 years. That's after the Hamas resistance attacked Israelis on October 7th. The Israelis have occupied Gaza. They've been attacking Palestinians for the past 70 years. But this time, over the past 2 years, we've seen one group that's been particularly hard hit, that's been affected, and those are children. So many of them have died, tens of thousands. We've seen the trauma among children. What are you seeing? I mean, how are the Palestinians coping with this?
In an astonishing way, drawing on reserves of resilience that I still have trouble understanding after 9 months working here, to give one answer. They are extremely resourceful people that find a way to provide as much support and care to these tragic cases as they possibly can. And in many cases, they're successful, and in some cases, they're simply not. And that's we don't do health, but that much I can tell you.
Chris McIntosh, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We turn next to the ceasefire and the challenges ahead as it moves forward to a second phase. Joining me now is Khalil Jahshan. He is Executive Director of the Arab Center in Washington, D.C. Also joining us from London is Yossi Mekelberg. He is a Senior Consulting Fellow with the Middle East and North Africa Program at Chatham House. And with us too is Nabeel Khoury. He is a former diplomat and Middle East expert, and he's also the author of Bunker Diplomacy, an Arab American in the U.S. Foreign Service. Welcome to all of you to the show. Khalil, just to follow up on what our guest Chris McIntosh told us there, a massive storm is set to hit Gaza in the next 48 to 72 hours. I mean, how devastating would this be for the people there whom, as I pointed out, have very flimsy shelters where they can seek protection from the elements?
First of all, thank you for starting the program with this interview. Indeed, I think Chris did a superb job describing the situation right now with the change in weather and the stormy weather that's been passing through the Gaza area and the rain. We have seen a lot of flooding, people living in tents, barely holding, water inundating inside and outside these tents. So what Chris mentioned has been also repeated by other UN and other international agency spokespeople, not only necessarily complaining about the weather and its impact on the people, but criticizing specifically Israeli restrictions on supplies that have hampered the ability to respond to this inclement weather. Remember, we're talking about basically Gaza being under 68 million tons of rubble. And with all that rain coming in, you have to deal with more than 200,000 buildings that have been either totally destroyed or partially destroyed and rendered useless. 81% of the structures in the enclave, in the Gaza Strip, have been damaged during the past 2 years. So when you have that type of rain coming in, even though it's probably colder right here now in the Washington, D.C. area, but still, I think under the circumstances we have been discussing the past 2 years and particularly the past few days in Gaza, this is really inhumane.
Yossi Mekelberg, let's move on to some of the efforts that are being made to defuse this crisis. And as I said at the beginning of the show, there are now major questions of that ceasefire process moving into its second phase. Hamas has called for international pressure on Israel and says that it will not move into the second phase as long as Gaza continues to be attacked by Israel. It wants Israel to also open another key border crossing and to halt these strikes. In your view, what is the status of this ceasefire plan right now?
Right now, I think negotiation stalled. And I think we all knew that moving from phase 1 to phase 2 is not going to be easy because in many ways it's going to determine the ability of both leaderships to survive in power. It's going to determine also the long-term relations between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, but even more than this, the relation between the Israel and Palestinians as a whole. And there are a lot of big questions here. The ability actually to, at this stage to diffuse the conflict, the recognition that this war that should have come to an end many, many months ago is actually now finished. And it's enough to listen to Israeli Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir that only yesterday said that the yellow line is the front border of Israel. If this is the approach, then it would be very difficult to move forward in any negotiations, because at the end of the day, the phase, the second phase implies, say quite explicitly, that at the end of the day, Israel needs to withdraw from Gaza and replace by international force. Now, it's very difficult to decide about the exact mandate of the international stabilization force. It's very difficult also to recruit from different countries the troops that needs for this stabilization force. So it's on every stage of it, if it comes to the government or governors, technocrats, who is going to be on the board of peace, who is going to be just below the board of peace dealing with governance and security, you see every stage of the way there are difficulties. And then hence why you need the guarantors, and first and foremost the United States, but also all the other guarantors not to lose sight of the need to move, and to move with a sense of urgency.
Nabeel Khoury, according to Palestinian health officials, more than 370 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli airstrikes since that ceasefire was announced. They've been killed in bombings and in shootings as well. Hamas says there's been more than 700 violations of the ceasefire. I mean, can it even be called a ceasefire with those kinds of attacks continuing? And what do you make of Israel's insistence that Hamas be disarmed?
Well, this week I've been writing a piece about the national security strategy of the Trump administration and comparing it to previous ones. And one of the ironies in it is that while the administration decries an imagined takeover of the US, an invasion of the US, by illegal immigrants. They're taking our jobs, they're taking our homes, all while empowering Israel to further dispossess the Palestinians via the total destruction of Gaza and the gradual takeover of the West Bank by illegal Israeli settlers. So with this going on, with the full knowledge of what people are doing, to talk about ceasefire and a peace board means absolutely nothing. The goal is still the same. It is the total dispossession of the Palestinians, and that's ongoing. And talks about a ceasefire only allows Trump to tout peace between Palestinians and Israelis. In the NSS, the National Security Strategy, the word Palestinian occurs only once in the context of, yes, there is an Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but Trump is taking care of it. So I don't buy for one moment that the war has ended.
Khalil Jahshan, a Hamas spokesman, said that the movement is prepared to put its weapons into storage. That's what it said. It will put it into storage, but not give them up as long as Israel stops attacking Gaza. I mean, the two sides are very far apart on this issue. What do you see as the major challenges for this ceasefire that was announced by the Trump administration last October?
Well, the problem with this part of the plan, the disarmament issue, is the same as the rest of the plan. It's the lack of detail and the fact that we rushed into this abbreviated plan without explaining how, and the time schedule and the details of how to implement all these phases. And that's why we're stuck in phase one. What Hamas is saying, and it has said that before, it's not new, that it is willing to sit down and discuss the issue of disarmament, but not necessarily surrendering. It has to be tied with the fact that Israel also made some commitments, and the plan itself has demanded certain responsibilities from Israel, first to withdraw, and as we heard earlier from Yossi, you get the chief of staff of the Israeli armed forces who is contradicting that. He's saying that the yellow line, which means allowing Israel to control more than 54% of the Gaza Strip. This is the indefinite future border that Israel will respect. That renders the whole plan meaningless. So what Hamas is saying, we're willing to continue the conversation, we're willing to continue the negotiations, but on the basis of mutual respect and mutual commitments to these early understanding. Besides, the administration, I think, bears the full responsibility of having to explain all these things. When you talk about disarmament, I mean, you ask the question, what does the U.S. mean by that? What does Hamas mean by that? What does Israel mean by that? Israel clearly means the total, the dismantlement and destruction of Hamas, totally. It doesn't mean just taking the weapons. And Hamas is not willing to accept that. No party would be willing to commit suicide in order to sign a piece of paper. And the U.S. is non-committal on that. Early on in the conflict, it used to agree with the Israeli point of view. Now it seems to be wavering on this issue. So there has to be some clarity in this plan if we are to proceed forward, and that clarity is absent today.
Yossi, getting back to the yellow line issue, which you initially raised, as you point out, Israel's military chief said that that will be the new border of Israel. Israel currently occupies 58% of Gaza. Is it the Israeli intention here to, what diplomats sometimes call, establishing facts on the ground? And does this completely undermine any chance towards two states?
I think facts on the ground are already been created. This is the yellow line. Those are the facts on the ground. The question if they can be changed, and that's what you need in phase two to change these facts on the ground. And again, going back to what the chief of staff of Israel said, he said this is the front line of Israel to defend the communities on the border with Gaza. Now, we know that the Trump plan, with all its gaps and holes and lack of details, disagree with this kind of approach. It's supposed to be a temporary line in order to allow the international force to enter. To the question if it's a peacekeeping operation or if it's a peace enforcement. Again, only at this point we enter into this kind of details which are missing. The same with what was mentioned earlier. Are we talking about disarmament there is, or disarming Hamas, or actually we can actually reach an agreement about a decommissioning of weapons, which is different. The end result will be that Hamas won't be able to use these weapons, but without being humiliated, without not playing any part in the future of Gaza. So this is the kind of details that need to be negotiated. My main question, you would expect hurdles in such difficult negotiation after such an horrific war. But is the international community, is capable of doing that and can have the focus and the attention, but also if a government such as the Israeli government and also Hamas are capable of negotiating and making the necessary concession. On the Israeli side, Israel enter into election year. We see more and more veering to the right. So I have huge question if this is possible at all. The only condition, the only possibility for this to happen, I think, if there is, the attention span, especially in Washington.
Nabeel Khoury, as you pointed out, the Israeli onslaught on Gaza has not stopped despite that ceasefire. Now, one of the key components of the second phase of that ceasefire is the deployment of this international stabilization force. We don't know yet who would make up this force. There are countries that have offered their troops, but we don't know what the final makeup will be, nor do we know what the terms and duties of this force would be in Gaza. I mean, how great is the risk that this force gets into place, and without these terms being made very clear, without the, I guess, terms of engagement being made very clear, how great is the risk that these forces could end up in a conflict with Israeli troops?
Well, the possibility is quite high. The Israelis have not accepted this And for the extreme right wing, it's unthinkable to have any troops other than their own in anywhere in Palestinian territory. It's a very shaky idea. At best, it brings back the idea of a mandate over Palestine, when you should be thinking of the Palestinian right to self-determination. It is sad to think that people don't learn from history. You know, the Palestinian suffering is the worst we've seen since the original Nakba in 1947 and 48. That led to several wars with Arab states, which were then degraded via 56 and 67 wars, and later a peace accord that took away the military option of Arab states. So Palestinian and Lebanese and Syrian, in other words, popular resistance forces arose.
Right.
The new regime in Iran. And now they then degraded the PLO, Hamas emerged,
Yeah.
and Hezbollah emerged. So do they really expect that nothing else will emerge now
Yeah.
that they've degraded Hamas and Hezbollah?
Okay, we've just got about 20 seconds left. Khalil, Jahshan, I want to get to you very quickly. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will be in Washington at the end of the month for a meeting with President Trump. What are your expectations?
Not much in terms of nudging the process forwards. I think, look, there are clearly some serious differences between the two, and I would expect the President of the United States to impress upon Netanyahu to honor the agreement and to keep it in place. However, the responsibility of doing so lies on the shoulders of both, frankly. It's not one-sided. As we have discussed throughout this program, the sponsor of this process need to flesh it out, need to explain what is needed, and otherwise we will never see the next steps in this plan.
Okay, we need to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat.